A single mom rushed into a burning mansion to save a billionaire's son. Everyone called her crazy, until they saw what happened next. Flames roared, smoke filled the air, and while everyone stood frozen, she ran straight into the fire. But what started as one act of courage would spark a story no one saw coming. The billionaire tries to repay her, but she refuses his money. And that's when everything changes. He offers her a job, but as their worlds collide, secrets start to surface. The media calls her a hero, yet someone wants her silenced. Behind the mansion's ashes lies a truth that could destroy them both. Why did a woman with nothing risk her life for a man with everything? And what will he sacrifice when love becomes the only thing left to save? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The Charleston evening settled into darkness as Imani River's tired fingers worked through another desk drawer, organizing papers and wiping away the day's dust. Thunder rumbled in the distance, making the windows of the downtown office building shudder. Her shoulders ached from hours of scrubbing and cleaning, but she kept going, knowing her 7-year-old son Caleb was waiting at home. Rain started pelting against the glass as she gathered her cleaning supplies. The weather matched her mood, heavy with worry about the stack of bills waiting on her kitchen counter. The electric company's final notice haunted her thoughts as she locked up the office and headed toward the parking garage. Across town, in their small but tidy apartment, Caleb sat at their worn kitchen table, his colored pencils scattered around him like fallen rainbow leaves. His small face scrunched in concentration as he added another tower to his castle drawing, complete with a brave knight standing guard at the gate. "Just like Mama," he whispered to himself as he colored the knight's cape in bright blue, his mother's favorite color. "She's the bravest person ever." Imani finally made it home, her uniform damp from the dash through the rain. The sight of Caleb's bright smile melted away some of her exhaustion. "Hey, baby, sorry I'm running late." "Look what I made, Mama." Caleb held up his drawing proudly. "It's a castle, and that's you protecting it." Imani's heart squeezed with love as she examined the picture. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Now how about some dinner?" They sat together at their small table, eating peanut butter sandwiches while the storm grew fiercer outside. The thunder was louder now, making the windows rattle. Caleb jumped at particularly loud crack, and Imani reached across to squeeze his hand. "It's okay, baby. Just God bowling up there," she said with a gentle smile, using her mother's old saying. "He must be winning." Caleb giggled, taking another bite of his sandwich. As they ate, Imani's mind wandered to the bills. The peanut butter sandwiches were a far cry from the meals she wished she could provide, but they'd gotten through harder times. Faith and love had always been enough before. They would have to be enough now. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated their kitchen like daylight, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that made them both jump. Caleb's eyes went wide. "That was close, Mama." "Too close," Imani agreed, moving to the window. In the distance, toward the ocean front where Charleston's wealthiest residents lived, she could see something that made her heart stop. An orange glow against the stormy sky, and black smoke rising despite the rain. The sound of sirens filled the air, wailing through the storm. Without thinking, Imani grabbed her keys. "Caleb, baby, put on your shoes. We need to go check on something." "But it's storming, Mama." "I know, baby, but someone might need help. Remember what we always say?" Caleb nodded solemnly. "God puts us where we need to be." They rushed to their old car, the rain somehow coming down even harder. As Imani drove toward the orange glow, following the sound of sirens, she could see it was coming from the Whitmore estate, the massive mansion that everyone in Charleston knew about, even if they'd never been inside. The scene that greeted them was chaos. Fire trucks were already there, their red lights reflecting off the wet pavement. The mansion's east wing was engulfed in flames, the fire somehow burning despite the downpour. A crowd of servants and workers huddled under umbrellas, their faces illuminated by the inferno. Imani parked and ran towards the crowd, Caleb holding tight to her hand. That's when she heard the screams. "Landon's still inside, second floor! The stairs are blocked. Someone help, please!" Through the rain and chaos, Imani saw a man being held back by firefighters, Ethan Whitmore himself, his usually immaculate appearance destroyed by smoke and rain, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "My son!" he was screaming. "My son is in there!" The crowd watched in horror as flames licked out of second-story windows. The firefighters were working frantically, but the fire was spreading too fast. Everyone seemed frozen, caught between the need to help and the paralyzing fear of the inferno before them. Imani looked at the burning mansion, then down at Caleb. "Stay right here with that nice police officer," she said firmly, leading him to a nearby officer. "Don't move until I come back." Before anyone could stop her, Imani pulled off her jacket and wrapped it around her head and face, leaving just enough space to see. She took a deep breath and ran toward the mansion's front door, ignoring the shouts behind her. The heat hit her like a wall as she entered. Smoke burned her eyes and throat, but she pressed forward, staying low where the air was clearer. The grand staircase was partially ablaze, but still standing. She could hear crying from above. "Landon!" she called out. "Landon, where are you?" A small voice answered through the smoke. "Help! I'm here!" Imani raced up the stairs, feeling them creak dangerously under her feet. Following the voice, she found a door and kicked it open. There, huddled in a corner, was a small boy clutching a stuffed animal to his chest. His face was streaked with tears and soot. "Come on, sweetheart," she said, quickly wrapping part of her jacket around his face. "Hold on to me tight." She lifted him into her arms, surprised by how light he was. The smoke was thicker now, and she could hear the building groaning around them. They had to move fast. The journey back down seemed to take forever. The heat was overwhelming, and Imani's lungs burned with every breath. She could feel Landon trembling against her as she carefully navigated the stairs. Just as they reached the bottom, there was a terrible cracking sound. Imani lunged forward, diving through the front door as the staircase collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and burning wood. The cool rain hit them like a blessing as they tumbled onto the wet grass. The crowd erupted in cheers and shouts of disbelief. Paramedics rushed forward as Ethan Whitmore broke free from the firefighters holding him back. "Landon!" he cried, falling to his knees beside them. "Oh God, Landon!" The boy reached for his father, still clutching his stuffed animal. As they embraced, Ethan looked up at Imani with tears in his eyes, a mix of gratitude and disbelief on his face. "You saved him," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved my son." Imani could only nod, coughing as paramedics wrapped blankets around both her and Landon. Through the crowd, she saw Caleb running toward her, the police officer close behind. "Mama!" he cried, throwing himself into her arms. "You're a real hero, just like in my picture." Imani held her son close, her heart still racing from what she'd just done. The rain continued to fall, but none of them noticed anymore. In that moment, as paramedics checked them over and the firefighters continued battling the blaze, something profound had changed. Though none of them knew it yet, their lives had become inexorably linked by this one act of courage in the storm. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room cast harsh shadows as nurses and doctors rushed between curtained beds. Imani sat on the edge of an examination table, her throat raw from smoke, but her eyes remained fixed on the treatment area where they had taken Landon. "Mom, please," the nurse said, holding up a syringe. "You need something for the pain. Those burns on your arms, not until I know he's okay," Imani insisted, her voice hoarse. She pulled the thin hospital blanket tighter around her shoulders, still wearing her smoke-stained work uniform underneath. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see Ethan Whitmore pacing the hallway. His expensive suit was ruined, streaked with soot and water damage. The cut on his forehead had been bandaged, but he hadn't bothered to clean up otherwise. Every few minutes he would stop, run his hands through his disheveled hair, and stare toward Landon's room before resuming his anxious walk. Caleb dozed in a chair beside her bed, exhausted from the night's events. She reached over to brush his curls back from his forehead, thanking God that he was safe. A mother from the apartment next door had agreed to watch him while Imani went to work, but when she heard about the fire on the news, she'd brought him to the hospital. The curtain rustled, and Ethan Whitmore stepped into her small treatment space. Up close, she could see the red rim around his eyes, the trembling in his usually steady hands. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it again, then finally managed to find his voice. "They say Landon will be fine," he said softly. "Some minor smoke inhalation, but no burns, thanks to you." He swallowed hard. "I don't even know how to begin." Imani shook her head. "Any mother would have done the same," she said simply, glancing at Caleb. "We protect our children. That's what we do." Ethan looked like he wanted to say more, but a doctor appeared with discharge papers for Imani. She signed them quickly, eager to get home and put her son to bed properly. "Please," Ethan said as she gathered her things, "at least let me have my driver take you home." "That's kind, but we'll be fine. My car's still at the estate." "I'll have it brought to you tomorrow," he insisted, and something in his voice made her accept this small gesture. The ride home was surreal, sitting in the back of a luxury car that cost more than she made in years. Caleb was wide-eyed at the leather seats and mini fridge, but too tired to fully appreciate it. When they arrived at their apartment complex, the driver helped them to their door despite Imani's protests. Morning came too quickly, bringing with it an unexpected chaos. Imani woke to the sound of voices outside their ground-floor apartment. Peeking through the blinds, she saw a small crowd of reporters and photographers gathered in the parking lot. "Mama, look!" Caleb exclaimed, pointing to the television. There she was, footage from the night before showing her emerging from the burning mansion with Landon in her arms. The caption below read, "Single mom hero of Charleston saves billionaire's son." "Oh my," Imani whispered, sinking onto their worn couch. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Calls from news stations, old friends, even her pastor. "Are we famous now?" Caleb asked, his face pressed against the window blinds. "No, baby. We're just the same as we were yesterday." But even as she said it, another news van pulled into the lot. Around noon, her phone rang again. This time, it was Ethan Whitmore's assistant, speaking in clipped, efficient tones about arranging a private visit. "Mr. Whitmore would like to express his gratitude personally," the woman explained. "Would 3 o'clock be convenient?" Imani hesitated. She didn't want this to become a spectacle, didn't want to be turned into some kind of feel-good story about the poor single mother who did something extraordinary. But she could hear the genuine urgency in the assistant's voice. 3 o'clock is fine." She agreed finally. She spent the next few hours tidying their small apartment, though it was already neat as a pin. Everything they owned might be second-hand or bargain store-bought, but she kept their home spotless and organized. The walls were decorated with Caleb's artwork and family photos, her parents who had passed away, her sister in Atlanta, Caleb through the years. At exactly 3 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled into the cracked asphalt lot, looking absurdly out of place among the old sedans and work trucks. Ethan Whitmore stepped out, wearing a fresh suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He carried a leather briefcase and looked somehow both more and less intimidating than he had the night before. Imani met him at the door before he could knock, not wanting to give the lingering paparazzi a photo opportunity. As she ushered him inside, she saw his eyes take in every detail of their apartment: the small but immaculate kitchen, the fold-out couch where she slept so Caleb could have the bedroom, the bookshelf filled with second-hand novels and textbooks from her abandoned nursing studies. His gaze lingered on the well-worn Bible on the coffee table, its pages marked with countless sticky notes and highlights. Something in his expression shifted, softened. "Please, sit down," Imani offered, gesturing to their only armchair. Caleb peeked out from his bedroom, eyes wide with recognition. "Hi, Mr. Whitmore," he called out, waving shyly. "Hello, Caleb," Ethan replied, managing a genuine smile. "Those are some impressive drawings on your wall." Caleb beamed before disappearing back into his room, leaving the adults to talk. Ethan opened his briefcase, pulling out a checkbook. "Ms. Rivers, what you did last night, there's no way I can ever truly repay you. But please, let me at least—" "No," Imani said quietly but firmly. "I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Whitmore, but you can't buy gratitude. You can only pay it forward." He stared at her, the blank check hovering between them. "I don't understand. If you want to show thanks, help someone else who needs it. There are plenty of single parents in this building who could use a break. There are children who need school supplies, families who skip meals to pay rent." She met his eyes steadily. "But I didn't go into that fire for a reward. I did it because it was right, and because I couldn't bear the thought of a child in danger." Ethan slowly put the checkbook away, looking both humbled and slightly lost. He glanced around the apartment again, but this time she could tell he was seeing it differently. Not as a place of lack, but as a home built with love and dignity despite hardship. "How is Landon?" she asked softly. "Better. He's asking about you, actually. He wants to thank you himself." Imani nodded. "Tell him he's welcome to visit sometime. Caleb would love to show him his toy cars." Ethan stood to leave, pausing at the door. "Ms. Rivers, thank you. Not just for saving my son, but for—" He gestured vaguely, seemingly at a loss for words. After he left, Caleb emerged from his room, clutching his favorite drawing pad. "Mama, will the rich man come back?" Imani sighed, pulling her son close. "I don't know, baby." She looked out the window, watching the expensive car navigate around the potholes in their parking lot. "I really don't know." The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan's temporary office suite at the Whitmore Tech Building. He sat in his leather chair, coffee untouched, watching the local news coverage play out on multiple screens. The identity of Charleston's mystery hero remains unconfirmed. A perfectly coiffed anchor announced, though sources say she's a single mother who works multiple jobs to support her young son. Another anchor chimed in. The question on everyone's mind: who is this brave woman who risked everything to save young Landon Whitmore? Ethan clicked off the screens, a strange mixture of emotions churning inside him. Shame crept up his neck as he remembered offering her that blank check. The way she'd refused it, not with pride or resentment, but with quiet dignity, had struck something deep within him. His assistant, Sarah, knocked and entered with a stack of papers. "I have that background information you requested on Imani Rivers," she said, placing the folder on his desk. Ethan opened it, scanning the contents. His eyes caught on several details. Former nursing student at Charleston Medical University, excellent grades, withdrew in her second year. The reason was clear. The dates aligned with Caleb's birth. She works 3 jobs. Sarah continued. Office cleaning at night, part-time at the Riverside Cafe during lunch hours, and weekend shifts at a senior center. Something stirred in Ethan's chest. Here was someone who had given up her dreams to care for her child, who worked herself to exhaustion to provide a stable home, and who still had the courage to run into a burning building to save a stranger's son. He stood abruptly. "Get me everything we have on the community outreach position at the foundation, and call legal. I want a job offer drawn up within the hour." Sarah raised an eyebrow, but nodded. She'd worked for him long enough to recognize his rare moments of inspiration. An hour later, Ethan walked into the Riverside Cafe, contract folder tucked under his arm. The lunch rush was just beginning, and he spotted Imani immediately. She moved efficiently between tables, her smile genuine despite her obvious exhaustion. The burns on her hands were still bandaged. When she saw him, she froze for a moment before approaching his table. "Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "this is unexpected. Please sit down for a moment." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I have a proposition for you." She glanced at the other tables, then called out to a co-worker, "Jenny, can you cover my section for 5 minutes?" When the other waitress nodded, Imani sat down, her posture straight but wary. "I did some research," Ethan began, then saw her expression tighten. "Not to intrude," he added quickly, "but because I believe in knowing the capabilities of people who impress me. You were a nursing student." Imani's fingers unconsciously touched the bandages on her hands. "That was a long time ago." "You withdrew to raise your son." It wasn't a question. "That takes courage, the same kind of courage I saw 2 nights ago." "Mr. Whitmore, please call me Ethan." He opened the folder. The Whitmore Foundation runs several community rebuilding projects throughout Charleston. We're currently looking for a community outreach coordinator, someone who understands both healthcare and the needs of working families. Imani's eyes widened slightly as he slid the contract across the table. "Full salary, comprehensive health benefits, flexible hours that would let you be home with Caleb in the evenings. The position involves coordinating with local clinics, organizing health fairs, and helping families navigate the healthcare system." She stared at the papers, then back at him. "Why?" "Because you have exactly what we need: compassion, understanding, and the ability to act decisively in a crisis." He leaned forward. "This isn't charity, Ms. Rivers. This is recognition of your skills and character." Her fingers traced the edge of the contract. "I don't want special treatment." "None offered. You'll be expected to meet the same standards as any other employee. The only difference is I already know you're capable of exceeding them." A small smile tugged at her lips. "You're very sure of yourself, Mr. Whitmore." "Ethan." He corrected again, returning her smile. "And no, I'm sure of you." She took a deep breath, then nodded. "I accept on one condition: no special treatment. I mean it. I want to earn this position, not be given it." "Agreed." He pulled out a pen. "When can you start?" "I'll need to give notice here and at my other jobs. 2 weeks? Perfect. The Foundation's HR will contact you tomorrow with all the details." That evening, Imani sat on the edge of Caleb's bed, running her fingers through his curls as she tucked him in. The boy's eyes were heavy with sleep, but he smiled up at her. "Mama, you look happy." He observed. "I am, baby." She kissed his forehead. "Tomorrow we start a new chapter. Things are going to be different." "Good different." "Yes, good different. Now sleep tight, my brave boy." Across town, Ethan stood in his darkened office, gazing out at the charred remains of his mansion visible in the distance. The fire had destroyed so much, but somehow, through its destruction, it had brought something unexpected into his life. He thought of Imani's courage, her dignity, her unwavering moral compass. She had run into those flames without hesitation, and in doing so had sparked something inside him. Something warm and bright that no fire could touch. He pressed his hand against the cool glass, remembering how she'd carried Landon out of that inferno. Perhaps she had saved more than just his son that night. Perhaps she had saved something in him too, something he hadn't even known needed saving. The Whitmore Foundation headquarters stood like a gleaming sentinel over Charleston Harbor, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun. Imani Rivers stood at the entrance, smoothing her newly purchased business suit and taking a deep breath. Her first day. The revolving doors whispered as she stepped inside. The security guard checked her ID and handed her a fresh badge. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Rivers." His smile was genuine, but she noticed his curious glance. She'd seen that look before, wondering how someone like her had landed here. The elevator carried her to the 15th floor, where the Community Outreach Division operated. As she stepped out, conversations hushed, heads turned, whispers followed. "That's her, the maid who saved Landon Whitmore. I heard she ran straight into the fire. Wonder how she really got this job." Imani lifted her chin and walked to her assigned desk, unpacking her simple supplies. A photo of Caleb went next to her computer, his bright smile giving her strength. She'd proven herself before. She would do it again. Her supervisor, Sarah Chen, approached with a stack of files. "Welcome to the team, Imani. Ready to dive in?" "Absolutely." Imani accepted the files, noting how some co-workers watched the exchange. "These are our current clinic partnerships. We need fresh eyes on their effectiveness. Your healthcare background will be valuable here." Imani immersed herself in the work, analyzing data and making detailed notes. Her nursing studies hadn't been wasted. She quickly spotted gaps in services and opportunities for improvement. Hours passed as she built spreadsheets and drafted proposals. Around 11 o'clock, a familiar voice made her look up. Ethan Whitmore stood by the department entrance, supposedly reviewing reports with Sarah. But his eyes kept drifting to Imani's desk. She pretended not to notice, though her cheeks warmed slightly. This became a pattern over the next few days. Ethan would find reasons to visit the floor, checking progress, discussing initiatives. He'd pause near her desk, asking thoughtful questions about her observations. His interest seemed genuine, professional, mostly. On her 4th day, the elevator doors opened to reveal Landon Whitmore and his nanny, Mrs. Peterson. The boy's eyes lit up instantly. "Miss Imani!" he cried, breaking free from his nanny's grip. He ran straight to her desk and wrapped his arms around her legs, pressing his face against her skirt. "You smell just like the lady who saved me." The office fell silent. Every head turned. Imani's heart squeezed as she knelt to his level. "Hello, Landon," she said softly. "It's good to see you." Mrs. Peterson hurried over. "I'm so sorry. He just took off. Landon, remember what we discussed about proper behavior?" But Landon wouldn't let go. "Daddy said you work here now. Will you come visit us, please?" Before Imani could answer, Ethan appeared from his office, apparently drawn by the commotion. His expression softened at the sight of his son clinging to Imani. "Actually," he said, "I was hoping to discuss that." He cleared his throat. "Imani, would you and Caleb join us for dinner tonight?" "Nothing formal. Just a quiet meal at the townhouse I'm renting while the mansion's being rebuilt." Landon bounced with excitement. "Please say yes. I have the new Super Racers game." Imani hesitated, but Landon's hopeful face and Ethan's gentle smile wore down her defenses. "That would be lovely, thank you." That evening, Imani and Caleb stood before an elegant townhouse near the Battery. Caleb squeezed her hand. "It's like a castle, Mama." "Remember your manners," she whispered as they rang the bell. Ethan opened the door himself, dressed casually in slacks and a blue sweater that brought out his eyes. "Welcome," he said warmly. "Please come in." The townhouse was beautiful but not ostentatious, with warm woods and comfortable furniture. Landon thundered down the stairs. "Caleb, want to see my game room?" The boys disappeared upstairs, their excited chatter floating down. Ethan led Imani to the kitchen, where amazing smells wafted from the oven. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. He smiled sheepishly. "I'm learning. After Sarah, my wife, passed, I realized I needed to do better for Landon, though I still order backup pizza just in case." Imani laughed. Smart man. They worked together to finish dinner, moving around each other with unexpected ease. Ethan told stories about his early business days, making her laugh with tales of his mistakes. She shared memories of her nursing studies, her dreams for the future. The boys came down for dinner, faces flushed from playing. Throughout the meal, Imani noticed how naturally Caleb and Landon interacted, already forming a friendship. Her son was usually shy with new people, but here he seemed completely at ease. After dinner, while the boys returned to their game, Imani helped Ethan load the dishwasher. She caught him watching her several times, his expression soft with something like gratitude, and perhaps something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming tonight, for saving Landon, for everything." She met his gaze. "You don't have to keep thanking me. I know, but I want to." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken things. Then they heard footsteps on the stairs as the boys came down for dessert. Later, as they prepared to leave, Landon hugged Imani's legs again. Looking up with those innocent eyes, he said softly, "I wish Miss Imani was my mummy." The words hung in the air like crystal. Ethan froze, color draining from his face. Imani's heart thumped painfully as she stroked Landon's hair, not knowing how to respond. The drive home was quiet, rain pattering against the windshield. Caleb had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching the new game Landon had insisted he borrow. Imani stared at the falling drops, each one catching the streetlights like tiny stars. Her heart felt too full, too confused. The evening had been lovely. Dangerously so. She'd seen the way Ethan looked at her, felt the warmth of his presence. And Landon's words, they stirred something deep inside her, something both wonderful and terrifying. The raindrops blurred as she drove carefully through the dark streets, each one holding a reflection of possibilities she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The week after the dinner brought a whirlwind of activity at the Whitmore Foundation. Imani threw herself into her new role, channeling her compassion into concrete action. Her desk became command central for coordinating relief efforts after the devastating coastal storm that had swept through Charleston's poorest neighborhoods. Each morning she arrived early, armed with fresh coffee and determination, her computer screen filled with spreadsheets tracking donations, volunteer schedules, and family needs. But it wasn't just numbers to her. Behind every entry was a real person, a story of struggle and hope. "Mrs. Martinez needs temporary housing for her 3 children," she explained to her team during their morning meeting. "The storm damaged their roof, and the landlord's dragging his feet on repairs. We can place them in one of our partner hotels until it's fixed." Her colleagues nodded, impressed by her thorough knowledge of each case. What surprised them even more was seeing Ethan Whitmore himself increasingly joining these meetings, listening intently as Imani outlined their priorities. One Tuesday morning, Ethan appeared at her office door. "I'd like to join you in the field today, if that's all right." Imani looked up, startled. "Of course, but are you sure? It's not exactly executive territory." He smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his usual businesslike expression. "I think that's exactly why I need to go." They spent that afternoon in the hard-hit Riverside district. Imani watched as Ethan knelt to talk with children, carried boxes of supplies, and listened to elderly residents describe their losses. His designer suit got dirty, his perfectly styled hair disheveled, but he seemed more alive than she'd ever seen him. At the Martinez family's temporary apartment, Mrs. Martinez hugged them both, tears streaming down her face. "God bless you," she kept saying. "God bless you both." On the drive back, Ethan was quiet. Finally, he said, "I've forgotten what it feels like to actually help people, not just write checks." Imani glanced at him. It's never too late to remember. Their partnership didn't go unnoticed. Local news stations began running stories about the unlikely duo transforming Charleston's disaster response. The Charleston Post and Courier ran a front-page feature titled "The Billionaire and the Housekeeper Angel, a Modern Tale of Redemption." Imani cringed at the headlines. "I wish they'd focus on the work, not us," she said one afternoon, tossing aside a magazine with their photo. "They're just trying to understand it." Ethan replied, "A single mother who saves a billionaire's son, then helps him save his city? It's quite a story." "I'm not saving anyone," she insisted. "I'm just doing what's right." At a press conference about the Foundation's expanded relief program, a reporter asked snidely if Ethan had hired Imani out of guilt or publicity. Ethan's response was immediate and fierce. "Ms. Rivers is the most qualified person for this position, period," he stated firmly. "Her compassion, intelligence, and dedication have transformed our ability to serve this community. Anyone suggesting otherwise is welcome to examine our results." Imani felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high. That evening, Caleb showed her his homework, a My Hero essay about her. She cried as she read it, holding her son close. The Foundation's work continued to expand. Imani developed new programs for emergency housing assistance and job training. Ethan backed every initiative, often working late into the night alongside her to secure funding and support. Then came the morning that changed everything. Imani arrived at work to find the office in chaos. Breaking news alerts flashed across every screen. Scandal at Whitmore Foundation. Millions missing from disaster relief funds. Her heart stopped as she read the anonymous report alleging systematic embezzlement of funds meant for storm victims. The evidence seemed convincing. Doctored books, suspicious transfers, missing documentation. The board called an emergency meeting. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Imani watched as faces turned hostile, fingers pointed accusingly. Ethan stood alone against them all, his shoulders straight but his face pale. By afternoon, the stock price of Whitmore Industries had plummeted. Partners were pulling out of deals. The empire Ethan had built over 20 years began crumbling in a matter of hours. That evening, long after everyone else had gone home, Imani returned to drop off some files. The outer office was dark, but light spilled from Ethan's door. She found him standing at the window, staring out at the rain-slicked city below. "Ethan," she said softly. He didn't turn around. "You should go home, Imani. No sense getting pulled into this mess." She set down the files and walked closer. "Talk to me. What really happened?" "I don't know." His voice was raw. "The numbers don't make sense. People I've trusted for years won't return my calls. The board wants my resignation by morning." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't even know whom to trust anymore." Imani moved to stand beside him. Without hesitation, she placed her hand on his shoulder. The simple touch seemed to break something in him. All the careful control, the practiced polish. "Then start by trusting what's right," she said quietly. He turned to look at her, his eyes haunted. "How can you still believe in me?" "Because I've seen your heart," she answered. "In how you love Landon, in how you've helped these families. That man wouldn't steal from people who need help." Thunder rumbled outside, low and ominous. They both stood in silence, watching lightning illuminate the stormy sky. The rain beat against the windows like accusations, while inside, The weight of what was coming settled over them both. Imani felt Ethan's shoulder tense under her hand. This crisis was different from the fire. No quick rescue would solve it. This was a storm that could destroy everything they'd built, everything they'd begun to feel for each other. The thunder grew closer, shaking the building's foundations. But neither moved away from the window or from each other. Sometimes, Imani thought, the only way through a storm is to face it together. Morning arrived with a vengeance. The sun had barely risen when dozens of news vans clogged the streets around the Whitmore Foundation building. Reporters clustered at every entrance like angry bees, their cameras flashing through the morning mist. Imani arrived early, having to push through the crowd. "Ms. Rivers, did you know about the corruption? Was your heroic rescue staged for publicity?" They thrust microphones in her face, but she kept walking, head held high. Inside the lobby, security guards struggled to hold back the press. Phones rang incessantly. On every television screen, Ethan's face appeared next to headlines screaming, "Whitmore Scandal" and "Billionaire's Betrayal." His name trended worldwide on social media, with millions condemning him. The office floor was eerily quiet. Empty desks showed where staff had already jumped ship, leaving resignation letters behind. Those who remained huddled in corners, whispering and casting nervous glances toward Ethan's office. Imani found him surrounded by mountains of paperwork. His tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept. "You shouldn't be here," he said without looking up. "Your reputation doesn't deserve this." "My reputation isn't what matters right now," she replied, pulling up a chair. "Show me what you found." They spent hours combing through financial records, tracing every payment, cross-referencing every transaction. Ethan's hands shook as he handled each document, as if each paper might hold the knife that would cut deeper into his wounded trust. Around midnight, when the building had emptied and the city lights twinkled below, Imani noticed something. "These transfers?" she said, pointing to a series of numbers. "They're all routed through the same offshore account, but the paperwork is signed by different board members." Ethan leaned closer, frowning. "Wait." He pulled up more files on his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. "These authorizations, they all trace back to one person's login credentials. Nathan Pierce." "Your brother-in-law?" "Sarah's brother." Ethan's voice cracked on his late wife's name. "He's been on the foundation board since the beginning. We started this foundation together, in her memory." He pushed back from the desk, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "How could he? Her own brother." Imani watched pain and betrayal wash over his face. She'd seen that look before, in the mirror, after Caleb's father abandoned them. The look of someone whose trust had been shattered by family. "Don't let this destroy your faith in everything," she said softly. "One person's betrayal doesn't negate all the good you've done. Doesn't it?" His laugh was bitter. "While I was busy playing humanitarian, he was stealing from the very people we promised to help. I failed Sarah. I failed everyone." "No." Imani's voice was firm. "You haven't failed anyone yet, but you will if you give up now." She stood, gathering her coat. "Tomorrow we start fighting back." The next morning they met early. Instead of hiding in the office, they drove to the communities where the foundation had promised help. House by house, family by family, they documented everything. Promises made, money received, work completed or abandoned. They met Mrs. Martinez, whose roof still leaked despite foundation funds supposedly paying for repairs. Mr. Johnson showed them moldy walls that should have been replaced months ago. Each story was a piece of evidence, each family's trust another reason to uncover the truth. What struck Ethan most wasn't just the depth of the betrayal, but how the communities still welcomed them. People offered coffee, shared their stories, showed pictures of children who'd received foundation scholarships. Despite everything in the news, they still believed in the Foundation's mission. He noticed something else, too. Before each visit, Imani would pause for a moment, eyes closed in silent prayer. The first time, he'd waited awkwardly. By afternoon, he found himself bowing his head alongside her, finding comfort in her quiet faith. "How do you do it?" he asked as they drove between appointments. "How do you stay so certain?" She considered the question carefully. "I'm not certain about everything, but I am certain about what's right, and I'm certain that God doesn't abandon us in our darkest moments. He uses them to show us the way forward." The late afternoon sun painted Charleston's famous bridge in shades of gold as they drove back to the city. Fog was rolling in from the harbor, thick and mysterious. Their headlights cut through the mist like bright arrows of hope, illuminating the path ahead, one small section at a time. Ethan glanced at Imani, her profile serene despite the day's heavy revelations. She'd stood beside him when others fled, believed in him when evidence suggested otherwise. In that moment, watching her quiet strength, he realized something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just about saving his foundation anymore. It was about becoming the kind of person worthy of such unwavering faith. The fog grew thicker as they crossed the bridge, their headlights barely penetrating the grey void ahead. But somehow, the uncertainty felt less threatening now. Like Imani's prayers, like the community's enduring trust, those twin beams of light were enough to show the next step forward. Sometimes, Ethan thought, that was all you really needed. The Charleston sun beat down mercilessly as volunteers gathered at the storm-damaged neighborhood near the waterfront. Imani stood at the center of the action, clipboard in hand, directing teams with quiet authority. Her voice carried across the busy worksite, warm but firm as she organized supplies and assigned tasks. "The Thompson family needs help with their roof," she called out to a waiting group. "And Mrs. Chen's porch still needs new railings." Ethan watched her from the supply truck, amazed at how naturally leadership came to her. He'd traded his usual tailored suit for worn jeans and a work shirt, sweat darkening the fabric as he hauled lumber and supplies. The past few days had taught him muscles he didn't know he had, but the ache felt good. Real, like honest work should. Nearby, a news van idled, cameras trained on the activity. Ethan barely noticed them anymore. Let them film. Let them see what really mattered, not scandals or accusations, but people helping people. "Mr. Whitmore," Caleb's voice piped up beside him. "Can you show me how to use the hammer again?" Ethan smiled, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Remember what I taught you yesterday? Grip it near the end for more power." He helped position Caleb's small hands on the tool. "That's it. Just like that." Landon appeared moments later, protective goggles too big for his face. "I want to help too." The boys worked together, carefully hammering nails into boards that would become part of someone's new porch. Their concentration was absolute, tongues sticking out slightly as they focused on each strike. Ethan felt his heart swell watching them, especially seeing how Landon had bloomed these past days, his usual shyness replaced by eager enthusiasm. By early afternoon, the heat became too intense for heavy work. Imani called for a lunch break, and the volunteers scattered to find shade. She grabbed a cooler full of sandwiches she'd prepared that morning, leading the way to a quiet spot on the old fishing dock. The harbor breeze was a blessing, carrying away some of the day's heat. Caleb and Landon wolfed down their sandwiches in record time, then begged permission to explore the pier. "Stay where? We can see you!" Imani called after them. The boys raced off, their footsteps thundering on the wooden planks. Ethan watched them chase each other, their laughter carrying across the water. "They've become quite the team," he said softly. "They have." Imani smiled, but there was something distant in her eyes as she watched the boys play. seeing them together. It reminds me of when I was little, watching my mother with her patients. Ethan turned to her, curious. He'd never heard her speak of her family before. She was a nurse. Imani continued, her voice gentle with memory. The kind who knew every patient's name, their families, their stories. She'd work double shifts during emergencies, could never say no to someone in need. She paused, wrapping her arms around her knees. There was a fire at the hospital 7 years ago. She was working the night shift. They said she went back in 3 times, helping patients get out. The 4th time. Imani's voice caught slightly. The 4th time she didn't make it out. Understanding dawned on Ethan's face. That's why you ran into my house that night, why you didn't hesitate. She nodded. I could hear Landon crying. All I could think was, what would my mother have done? The answer was simple. She smiled then, a smile that held both sadness and pride. She taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified. Ethan sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of her words. Here was a woman who had lost so much, yet still gave so freely of herself, who turned her pain into purpose, her loss into love for others. Your mother would be proud of you, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. Their conversation was interrupted by shouts of joy from the pier, where Caleb and Landon had spotted a pod of dolphins playing in the harbour. They ran back, breathless with excitement, pulling their parents up to see. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of activity. More repairs, more volunteers arriving, more progress made. As the sun began to set, Ethan watched the last of the workers leave, satisfaction evident on their tired faces. That evening, in the quiet of his temporary home, he stood before Sarah's portrait. His late wife smiled down at him, her eyes kind and knowing, just as he remembered. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the usual crushing weight of guilt when he looked at her. I think I'm finally ready to forgive myself, he whispered to her image, for not being there that day, for not saving you. He touched the frame gently. But I think maybe you've been trying to show me a different way to honor you. The next morning, he arrived early at the foundation office, energy humming through him. When Imani walked in, he could barely contain his excitement. I have an idea, he burst out, spreading blueprints across her desk. You remember the old Marshall Community Center on East Bay Street? Imani nodded, leaning in to look at the plans. It's been closed for years, but the building is still sound. What if we reopened it? His words tumbled out faster now. Not just as a community center, but as a safe haven for single mothers. Affordable childcare, job training programs, support services, everything they need to get back on their feet. Imani stared at the plans, then at him, her eyes wide with emotion. You want to help other women like you, give them a chance to build a better life for their children. He extended his hand across the desk. What do you say? Partners? She reached out to shake his hand, but both of them felt it. The spark that passed between them, the warmth that lingered longer than a simple business arrangement would warrant. When their eyes met, there was an understanding that this partnership meant more than either could yet admit. In that moment, as morning sun streamed through the office windows and the sounds of Charleston coming alive drifted up from the street below, something shifted. Something that felt like hope, like possibility, like the beginning of a new chapter neither had expected to find. The August heat wrapped around Charleston like a warm blanket, but inside the old Marshall Community Center, hope bloomed with each passing day. Volunteers streamed in and out, carrying lumber, paint cans, and determination. The building, once forgotten, now hummed with new life. Imani coordinated the efforts with natural grace, her clipboard becoming as familiar as an extension of her arm. She knew every volunteer by name, made sure cold water and snacks were always available, and somehow managed to solve problems before they arose. The neighborhood had started calling it the Rivers House, a name that made her blush, but filled her with quiet pride. Local news crews came by regularly now, their stories shifting from scandal to redemption. Whitmore Foundation leads community revival, read one headline. Billionaire's journey from crisis to community, declared another. Ethan handled the attention with humility, always redirecting praise to the volunteers and to Imani. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, most volunteers had gone home. The sound of children playing basketball on the newly restored court drifted through open windows. Imani walked through the quiet halls, checking items off her list, when she heard the soft tap of a hammer from one of the classrooms. She found Ethan there, suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, working on a broken window frame. His tie hung loose around his neck, and his usually perfect hair fell across his forehead as he concentrated on his task. "The maintenance crew could handle that tomorrow," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He looked up, a gentle smile crossing his face. "I know, but sometimes it feels good to fix things with your own hands." Imani settled into a nearby chair, watching him work. "You're getting pretty good at that." "Had to learn," he chuckled. "After Sarah died, I threw myself into work. Thought if I could just build enough, achieve enough, it would fill the empty spaces." He paused, testing the window frame. "Took me years to realize some spaces can't be filled with success." "What about faith?" Imani asked quietly. Ethan's hand stilled on the window frame. "I used to pray. Every night, Sarah and I would pray together. After the accident." He swallowed hard. "I couldn't anymore. Felt like God had turned his back on me." Imani stood and moved closer, her presence gentle and steady. "Maybe prayer's been waiting for you, not the other way around." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ethan turned to face her, and suddenly they were standing close enough to see the flecks of gold in each other's eyes. The moment stretched, filled with something neither dared to name. "Mama!" Caleb's voice echoed from outside. "Come see what I found." The spell broke. Imani stepped back, her cheeks warm. "I should go." Ethan nodded, his voice rough. "He needs you." The weekend arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for the grand opening of Rivers House. Hundreds of people gathered in the freshly landscaped courtyard. Tables overflowed with potluck dishes, and someone had strung lights between the trees, ready for when evening fell. The ceremony was simple but moving. Local officials praised the initiative, community leaders spoke about hope, and when Imani took the podium, her words touched every heart. "This isn't just a building," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is proof that when we reach out to each other, when we choose love over fear, miracles happen. Every person who walked through these doors with paintbrushes and hammers, with food and encouragement, you're the miracle." As dusk settled over the celebration, music filled the air. Children chased each other across the lawn, while parents chatted in groups, sharing stories and laughter. The string lights twinkled to life, creating a magical atmosphere. Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as Imani danced with Caleb in the center of the courtyard. The boy stood on her feet as she swayed, both of them laughing. The sight stirred something deep in Ethan's chest, a feeling of completeness he thought he'd lost forever. Landon tugged at his hand. "Dad, can we dance too?" Ethan scooped up his son, carrying him to the makeshift dance floor. As they moved to the music, he caught Imani's eye over Caleb's head. Her smile, radiant and real, matched the joy he felt bubbling up inside. The evening air was sweet with jasmine, the music soft and warm, and all around them, the community they'd helped rebuild celebrated new beginnings. For one perfect moment, everything felt right with the world. Ethan held on to that feeling, letting it fill every corner of his heart. The strings of light swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting golden shadows on happy faces. Children's laughter mixed with the music, creating a symphony of joy. In that moment, surrounded by the fruits of their shared labor and the love of their community, happiness felt like more than just a fleeting emotion. It felt like home. The Charleston Ritz-Carlton ballroom sparkled like a fairy tale castle. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across the marble floors, and the city's elite moved through the space in designer suits and flowing gowns. At the entrance, Imani Rivers paused, smoothing her simple blue dress, borrowed from a co-worker at the foundation. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the silver pendant at her throat. "You look beautiful," a warm voice said behind her. She turned to find Ethan, handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His eyes held a warmth that made her breath catch. "Thank you," she managed, fighting the urge to fidget. "I feel a little out of place." "Nonsense." He offered his arm. "You belong here more than anyone." As they entered the ballroom, heads turned. Whispers followed them, some admiring, some curious, some tinged with judgment. Imani held her chin high, remembering her mother's words. "Your dignity isn't determined by other people's opinions." The evening progressed with speeches and presentations about the Whitmore Foundation's charitable work. Ethan sat beside her at the head table, occasionally leaning close to explain inside jokes or share observations that made her smile despite her nerves. When he finally stood to make his closing remarks, the room fell silent. He spoke about community, about second chances, about how sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected teachers. Then his voice softened. "Tonight I'm proud to announce a new initiative," he said, his eyes finding Imani's. "The Rivers Scholarship Fund for Working Mothers will provide full tuition and childcare support for single mothers pursuing higher education, because sometimes all someone needs is a chance to reach their full potential." The applause was thunderous. Imani felt tears pricking at her eyes as she realized he'd remembered her abandoned nursing dreams. All around her, Charleston's wealthy and powerful rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Ethan extended his hand to her. "Would you do me the honor?" The orchestra began playing a waltz, and suddenly she was in his arms, floating across the dance floor. His hand was warm against her back, steady and sure as he guided her through the steps. "I never learned to dance properly," she admitted quietly. "You're doing perfectly," he murmured. "Just trust me." And she did. They moved together as if they'd practiced for years, her blue dress swirling around them, his eyes never leaving hers. Above them, the chandelier scattered stars across their faces, and for a moment everything else faded away. The watching crowd, the whispers, the weight of expectations. There was only the music, the movement, and the way his smile made her feel, both stronger and more vulnerable than she'd ever been. They shared quiet laughter as he spun her, caught her, drew her close again. It felt like magic, like possibility, like every fairy tale she'd ever read to Caleb coming true at once. But reality had a way of shattering dreams. Later, as she stepped away to check her phone, worried about Caleb at home with a sitter, she saw the message. Anonymous, stark black text against white. "He's using you to fix his reputation. Once the cameras are gone, so are you." The words hit her like a physical blow. The ballroom suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too false. She looked across the room at Ethan, charming a group of potential donors, and doubt crept in like poison. Wasn't it too perfect? A billionaire's redemption story, featuring the humble single mother who saved his son? The media would eat it up. And hadn't she noticed how photographers always seemed to appear when they were working together? How press releases highlighted their partnership? "I need some air," she told a concerned waiter, gathering her borrowed dress and hurrying towards the exit. She didn't see Ethan notice her departure, didn't see his confused expression as she disappeared into the night. The next morning, she called in sick. She turned off her phone, unable to face his messages or calls. The foundation office left voicemails, but she couldn't bring herself to respond. Every time she considered going back, that message flashed in her mind, along with all the magazine headlines and social media posts analyzing their relationship. Days passed in a blur. She returned to her old job at the Palmetto Cafe, where at least the work was honest and straightforward. Her former manager welcomed her back without questions, just a knowing look and a gentle squeeze of her shoulder. Online, the rumors exploded. "Whitmore's publicity romance exposed," screamed one headline. "Single mom hero abandons foundation," declared another. Social media filled with theories and accusations, picking apart every photo, every interaction. As she served coffee and sandwiches, Imani felt foolish. How had she ever believed she could belong in Ethan's world? She'd let herself get caught up in the fantasy, forgetting that fairy tales weren't meant for people like her. What hurt most was knowing she'd genuinely cared about the foundation's work, about the families they'd helped, about Landon's sweet smile, and about Ethan himself. She'd started to believe in something more, something real beneath all the publicity and pressure. But maybe that had been the biggest fairy tale of all. Across town, Ethan sat in his office, staring at his unanswered messages to Imani, each one more concerned than the last, ending with a simple, "Please just tell me what's wrong." He didn't know that at that very moment, his board of directors was gathering for an emergency meeting. He didn't know that by sunset they would force his resignation, citing the scandal's damage to investor confidence. He only knew that somehow he'd lost something precious, something that had nothing to do with his company or his reputation. In her small apartment, Imani wiped tables and helped Caleb with homework, trying to convince herself she'd done the right thing. But late at night, when the city slept, she found herself remembering the feeling of dancing under crystal lights, of believing in magic, if only for a moment. The borrowed blue dress hung in her closet like a reminder of everything that could have been. And everything she feared was never real at all. The autumn leaves scattered across Charleston's cobblestone streets, marking the passage of time since the gala that changed everything. 3 weeks had slipped by like water through cupped hands, each day a little grayer than the last. At the Rivers house, Imani moved through her duties with mechanical precision, checking on families, coordinating supplies, and maintaining the programs she and Ethan had built together. But the halls felt hollow now, despite the constant flow of people. His absence hung in the air like an unfinished sentence. "Miss Angela needs more diapers for her twins," a volunteer reported, pulling Imani from her thoughts. "I'll bring them up myself," she replied, grateful for the distraction. In the storage room, surrounded by neatly organized shelves, she allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her hand brushed against a tool belt hanging on the wall, the one Ethan had used while fixing windows and door frames. She could still picture him there, sleeves rolled up, determination etched on his face as he worked alongside everyone else. At home, Caleb's questions became harder to dodge. "Mama, why doesn't Mr. Whitmore come to see us anymore?" he asked one evening over mac and cheese. "Landon says his daddy's really sad." Imani stirred her untouched dinner. Sometimes grown-ups need space, baby, to figure things out. "But you're sad too," Caleb observed with that piercing clarity only children possess. I hear you crying sometimes when you think I'm sleeping." She reached across the table to squeeze his small hand. "We'll be okay, sweetheart. We always are." Across town, in a sparsely furnished apartment overlooking the harbor, Ethan Whitmore sat in darkness. His usual sharp appearance had softened around the edges, his clothes hanging looser, his face bearing several days' worth of stubble. Take-out containers cluttered the coffee table, evidence of meals eaten without tasting. Landon's toys lay scattered across the floor, bright spots of color in the monotone space. The boy had adapted to their new circumstances better than expected, though he still asked about their old home, about the foundation, about Imani. "Daddy?" Landon's voice drew Ethan from his brooding. "Yes, buddy?" "Miss Imani used to pray for you. She told me once. Maybe you should pray for her now." The simple suggestion hit Ethan like a physical blow. He remembered how she would bow her head briefly before difficult meetings, how she'd whisper thanks before meals. Faith had come as naturally to her as breathing. That night, after tucking Landon into bed, Ethan stood at his window. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of lights and shadows. His reflection stared back at him, haunted and uncertain. "I don't even know how anymore," he whispered to the empty room. But slowly, hesitantly, words began to form. "God, if you're there, if you can hear me after all this time." His voice cracked. He hadn't prayed since Sarah's death, since that terrible morning when his world had first crumbled. But now, thinking of Imani's quiet strength, her unwavering belief in doing what was right, he found himself continuing. "Help me understand what went wrong. Help me find a way to make things right, and please watch over her. She deserves so much more than this mess I've made of everything." The prayer felt clumsy, inadequate. But something shifted in his chest, like a door long rusted shut creaking open just a fraction. Days passed. Charleston's weather began to turn, the air growing heavy with moisture. Local news stations buzzed with increasing urgency about a massive storm system forming off the coast. This could be worse than Hugo, meteorologists warned, pointing to satellite images of swirling clouds. Low-lying areas need to prepare for significant flooding. At the Rivers house, Imani threw herself into emergency preparations. She coordinated with local shelters, stockpiled supplies, and helped families develop evacuation plans. "The important thing is to stay calm," she told a group of worried mothers. "We've got enough food and water for everyone, and the building's on high ground. We'll weather this together." But as the sky darkened and the wind picked up strength, some of the staff began to leave. "You should go too," urged Marcus, the elderly maintenance man. "Your apartment's in the flood zone. Take Caleb somewhere safe." Imani shook her head. "Not until everyone here is taken care of. There are still 3 families without transportation, and Mrs. Rodriguez is due any day now. I'm not leaving them." Outside, the wind had begun to scream, bending palm trees like blades of grass. The first heavy drops of rain struck the windows like thrown pebbles. Weather alerts blared from every phone and radio, warning of storm surge, of roads already flooding, of bridges closing. But inside the Rivers house, Imani moved with steady purpose, checking emergency lights, distributing blankets, organizing activities to keep children distracted from the growing storm. She had faced fire to save 1 child. She would face this flood to protect dozens more. The power flickered ominously. In the common room, a little girl began to cry, and Imani knelt beside her with a gentle smile. "Would you like to hear a story?" she asked, gathering other frightened children close. "Once upon a time there was a brave little boy who wasn't afraid of storms because he knew that after every dark cloud comes sunshine." As she spoke, her phone buzzed with a text message. She ignored it, focusing on the children's faces. But later, In a quiet moment, she checked the screen and felt her heart skip. It was from Ethan. "Are you safe? Please tell me you're not still at the Rivers house." She stared at the message until another gust of wind rattled the windows, pulling her back to the reality of the moment. The storm was only beginning, and with it would come a reckoning none of them could escape, not from nature and not from the truths they'd been avoiding. Thunder cracked overhead like breaking glass, and somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens began to wail. The rain began as thick drops, but quickly transformed into sheets of water that pounded Charleston's streets with relentless fury. Inside the Rivers house, Imani moved with purposeful urgency, directing volunteers to stack sandbags and move essential supplies to higher ground. "Get those medical kits to the second floor," she called out, her voice steady despite the chaos. "And make sure all the flashlights have fresh batteries." The community center's fluorescent lights flickered ominously, casting strained shadows across worried faces. 23 women and children huddled in the main room, wrapped in blankets and clutching their few precious belongings. The sound of the storm grew louder with each passing minute, wind howling through every crack and crevice of the building. Caleb clung to his mother's leg, his small fingers gripping the fabric of her jeans. "Mum, I'm scared," he whispered, but his chin was lifted brave and strong, just like she'd taught him. Imani knelt down beside him, brushing his cheek with her thumb. "Remember what we say about storms? They're just God's way of watering his garden," Caleb recited, managing a wobbly smile. "That's right, baby." She hugged him close, feeling his rapid heartbeat against her chest. "And we're safe here, all of us together." But even as she spoke the words, she noticed the first signs of water seeping under the front doors. Dark patches spread across the floor like ink stains, growing larger by the minute. The wind outside reached a fever pitch, and the building groaned under its assault. Mrs. Rodriguez, 8 months pregnant, gripped her chair with white knuckles. "Imani, maybe we should have left when they first warned us." "We're on high ground," Imani assured her, though doubt gnawed at her certainty. "The water would have to rise more than 6 feet to reach us." The lights gave one final flicker and died, plunging the room into darkness. Several children screamed, and Imani quickly switched on her flashlight, creating a small island of light in the gloom. "Everyone stay calm," she called out, her voice carrying over the storm's fury. "We have plenty of flashlights and batteries. This is why we prepared." Across town, Ethan Whitmore sat in his temporary apartment, watching the news with growing horror. The local station's helicopter footage showed entire neighborhoods transformed into lakes, cars floating like toys in the murky water. Then the camera panned to a familiar building. "We're live above the Rivers House Community Center," the reporter's voice crackled through static, "where despite mandatory evacuation orders, sources say several families remain trapped inside. Emergency services are overwhelmed, and the water continues to rise." Ethan's heart stopped as he recognized Imani's car still in the parking lot, now half submerged in the flood. Without hesitation, he grabbed his truck keys and ran for the door. "Dad!" Landon called after him. "Where are you going?" "Stay with Mrs. Peterson," he told his son, referring to their elderly neighbor who often watched him. "I have to help them." The streets had become treacherous rivers, debris floating past like dangerous missiles. Ethan's truck, with its lifted suspension, plowed through the shallow areas, but each block brought deeper water. Police barricades blocked major intersections, their lights reflecting off the flood in eerie patterns. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, their sound distorted by the wind and rain. Twice he had to back up and find alternate routes as roads disappeared under the rising water. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, and he found himself whispering the same prayer over and over. please let them be okay. Please let me get there in time. When he finally reached the Rivers house, the scene was apocalyptic. Water churned around the building's foundation, and debris slammed against its walls with each wave. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he saw a figure in the doorway holding a flashlight, Imani. He waded through knee-deep water towards the entrance, fighting against the current. "Imani!" he shouted over the wind's roar. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You can't be here!" she yelled back, her hair whipping around her face. "It's too dangerous." "I wasn't there when the fire took my home," he called out, moving closer, the water now at his waist. "I'll be here when the water tries to take yours." Their eyes met across the distance, and something passed between them. Understanding, forgiveness, determination. Without another word, they began working together, forming a human chain to help the women and children through the deepening water to his truck. "Hold on to the rope," Imani instructed, securing a line between the door and the vehicle. "Keep the children between two adults." The water rose steadily, reaching their chests as they helped Mrs. Rodriguez, who could barely walk against the current. Thunder cracked overhead like artillery fire, and lightning illuminated the scene in stark flashes. Desperate faces, reaching hands, the water's dark surface broken by rain and debris. "Mommy!" Caleb's voice carried over the chaos as Ethan lifted him, high above the flood. "I'm right here, baby," Imani called back, her voice strong and sure despite her trembling hands. "Mr. Whitmore's going to get you to the truck. I'm right behind you." They worked methodically, fighting exhaustion and the ever-rising water. Each trip between the building and the truck became more treacherous as the current strengthened. Ethan's muscles burned from lifting children and supporting elderly women, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not with Imani beside him, showing the same courage she'd displayed the night of the fire. The water reached their shoulders when they helped the last mother into the truck's cab. The vehicle's suspension groaned under the weight of its precious cargo, but the engine still rumbled steadily, a sound of hope above the storm's fury. Ethan turned to Imani, who was checking one final time that no one remained inside. "We have to go now," he shouted. "The water's still rising." She nodded, securing the community center's door with shaking hands. As she turned back toward the truck, a massive wave of debris-filled water slammed into her, threatening to sweep her away. Without hesitation, Ethan lunged forward, catching her arm and pulling her against his chest. "I've got you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've got you." Together they fought through the flood towards the truck, while thunder split the sky and rain continued to pound Charleston's streets with unrelenting force. The wind howled as Ethan and Imani worked tirelessly, making trip after treacherous trip between his truck and the Rivers house. The floodwaters continued rising, now reaching their chests, making each journey more dangerous than the last. "Just 3 more families," Imani called out over the storm's roar, her voice barely carrying above the wind. She gripped the guide rope with one hand while supporting Mrs. Martinez, who clutched her infant daughter tightly. Ethan waded ahead of them, breaking the current and checking for hidden obstacles beneath the murky water. His expensive suit was ruined, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting everyone to safety. "Watch your step here," he warned, feeling his way along the submerged sidewalk. "There's a deep spot." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the scene in stark white. The streets had become rushing rivers, carrying all manner of debris, tree branches, trash cans, even a mailbox that bobbed past like some bizarre buoy. "The baby's getting cold," Mrs. Martinez whimpered, trying to shield her daughter from the rain. "We're almost there," Imani assured her, though her own teeth were chattering. "Just a few more steps." They reached the truck, where Ethan helped lift mother and child into the crowded cab. Inside, dozens of faces peered out through fogged windows, the families they'd already rescued, huddled together for warmth. 2 more trips," Ethan said, pushing his soaked hair from his eyes. "We can do this." Imani nodded, already turning, back toward the building. The rope between them grew taut as they fought against the current. Thunder cracked overhead, so close it made the water vibrate around them. They had just reached the river's house entrance when Imani spotted it, a massive section of wooden fencing, torn loose by the storm, hurtling towards them in the flood. "Ethan, look out!" she screamed. He turned, but too late. The debris slammed into him with crushing force, sweeping his legs out from under him. In an instant, he disappeared beneath the dark water. Without hesitation, Imani dove after him. The cold shocked her system as she plunged into the murky flood. Her hand searched desperately in the darkness, finally catching hold of his jacket. Using all her strength, she pulled upward, fighting against the current that tried to drag them both away. They broke the surface together, gasping for air. Ethan coughed violently, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead where the debris had struck him. "Hold on to me," Imani commanded, wrapping one arm around his waist while keeping hold of the guide rope with her other hand. Together they struggled toward the nearest structure, an old brick church whose steps rose just high enough above the flood to offer refuge. Inside, the church was dark and eerily quiet compared to the storm's fury outside. Water leaked through the roof, creating small waterfalls that gleamed in the light of emergency candles left burning on the altar. The air smelled of wet wood and melting wax. Imani helped Ethan onto a pew, her hands trembling as she pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket. "Stay still," she whispered, pressing the cloth against his wound. "You could have died out there." He winced at her touch but managed a faint smile. "So could you," he replied softly. "But you still came for me once." His eyes met hers in the candlelight. Just like that night in the fire. The weight of everything unspoken between them seemed to fill the sacred space. The distance they'd maintained, the misunderstandings, the fear of trust, it all fell away in the gentle flicker of candlelight. Imani's hand lingered on his cheek, no longer just tending his wound. Ethan reached up, covering her fingers with his own. Words failed them completely as they sat there, dripping water onto the ancient wooden pew, their breaths sinking in the quiet. Through the stained glass windows, they watched the storm rage on. But here, in this moment of shelter and truth, something settled between them, a certainty that hadn't existed before. Every barrier had been washed away by the flood, every doubt drowned in the deluge. Hours passed as they sat together, sometimes talking softly, sometimes just listening to the rain. Imani shared stories of her mother's faith, of finding strength in the hardest moments. Ethan spoke of his fears of failing Landon, of losing himself in grief after his wife's death. "I stopped believing in anything bigger than myself," he admitted, "until I met you." She squeezed his hand gently. "Sometimes God sends us exactly what we need, even if it comes in unexpected ways." As the night wore on, the storm's fury gradually began to subside. The thunder grew more distant, the wind less fierce. Eventually, a different kind of light began to filter through the windows, the soft grey of approaching dawn. They stepped outside onto the church steps, watching as the first rays of sunrise painted the flood waters in shades of gold and pink. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind a transformed world, scarred but surviving. Ethan turned to Imani, taking both her hands in his. No words were needed. Everything that mattered had already been said in the quiet moments of that long night. Their eyes met with perfect understanding. The storm had passed, and with it all their doubts had washed away. The water was already beginning to recede, revealing glimpses of the familiar streets beneath. but they knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. Like the city around them, they too had been transformed by the flood, broken open and made new by the power of nature and the even greater power of love. They stood together on the church steps, watching the sun rise over Charleston, their hands still intertwined. The dawn painted everything in shades of hope, promising a new beginning neither of them had expected to find in the midst of the storm. 2 days after the flood, Charleston began to dry out under a gentle autumn sun. The waters receded, leaving behind mud-caked streets and weather-beaten buildings. But amid the cleanup efforts, a different story captured the city's attention. Every major news channel ran footage of Ethan and Imani's rescue efforts during the storm. CNN praised their extraordinary courage under pressure, while local stations shared cell phone videos of them wading through chest-deep water, helping mothers and children to safety. Social media exploded with stories from those they'd saved that night. "They just kept coming back," one young mother told reporters, cradling her infant. "The water was rising so fast, but Miss Rivers and Mr. Whitmore wouldn't stop until everyone was safe." The Rivers house stood as a testament to resilient construction, its brick walls having withstood the flood's fury. Though the first floor needed repairs, the building remained structurally sound. Within hours of the news coverage, donations began pouring in. Local businesses pledged supplies for repairs. Contractors offered free labor. Community members showed up with mops and buckets, ready to help restore the haven that had sheltered so many during the storm. Imani watched in amazement as the donation total climbed. First $10,000, then $50,000, soon passing $100,000. People seemed eager to support what the Rivers House represented: hope, community, and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Ethan, still sporting a bandage on his forehead, worked alongside volunteers despite doctors' orders to rest. His presence attracted more media attention, but he deflected questions about his injury, focusing instead on coordinating relief efforts. The genuine humility in his actions spoke louder than any interview could. 3 days after the storm, Ethan's office announced a press conference on the steps of City Hall. Speculation ran wild. Some predicted he would announce his return as CEO. Others wondered if he planned to sell his remaining assets and leave Charleston entirely. The morning of the conference dawned clear and crisp. News vans lined the streets, their satellite dishes reaching toward the cloudless sky. Reporters clutched notepads and microphones, trading theories about what was to come. Imani stood near the back of the crowd, her heart pounding. Caleb held her hand tightly, sensing her nervousness. She hadn't spoken to Ethan since the morning after the flood, when they'd parted ways outside the church. Something had changed between them that night, but neither had found the words to define it. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, Ethan stepped up to the podium. He looked different from the polished businessman who had once commanded boardrooms. His suit was impeccable as always, but his demeanor had softened. The hard edges of corporate power had been replaced by something more human. "Good morning," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. 2 years ago, I lost my wife in an accident. I buried myself in work, thinking success could fill the void of loss. I built towers of glass and steel, but my heart remained empty. He paused, his eyes finding Imani in the crowd. Then a stranger ran into a burning building to save my son. She showed me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in courage, compassion, and faith. Cameras clicked rapidly as he continued. During the flood, I watched that same woman risk everything to help others. She taught me that leadership isn't about power, it's about service. The crowd grew completely still as Ethan squared his shoulders. That's why, effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Whitmore Industries and permanently transferring control of the Whitmore Foundation, along with 75% of my personal assets. to a new community board headed by Imani Rivers. Gasps rippled through the assembled reporters. Cameras flashed frantically. Imani felt her knees go weak. Caleb squeezed her hand tighter, looking up at her with wide eyes. The Foundation's assets, currently valued at over $2 billion, will be restructured to focus entirely on community development, affordable housing, and education initiatives for working families. Ethan continued. The remaining 25% of my assets will be placed in trust for my son, Landon, with the hope that he grows up understanding true value the way Miss Rivers' son Caleb already does. Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan raised his hand for silence. Someone once told me you can't buy gratitude. You can only pay it forward. She ran into fire for my son. She walked through storms for this city. If I have any wealth left, it belongs to people like her. His voice grew softer, more personal. Because she taught me that real miracles don't come from money. They come from ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary. The crowd erupted into applause and shouted questions. Camera flashes created a storm of light. But Ethan didn't seem to notice. He stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward Imani, smiling through the chaos of lights and voices. Tears streamed down Imani's face as he approached. Caleb bounced excitedly beside her. The noise of the crowd seemed to fade away as Ethan stopped in front of them, his eyes holding nothing but warmth and certainty. Reporters pressed closer, microphones extended, questions flying. But in that moment, surrounded by the whirlwind of media attention, Ethan and Imani stood in a pocket of calm. Everything that needed to be said had already been spoken in the quiet of a candlelit church, in the midst of a storm that had washed away all their doubts. The autumn sun shone down on City Hall's steps, turning the morning into gold. Charleston buzzed with the energy of new beginnings, of hope restored, of love that had grown in the most unexpected places. Through fire and flood, through doubt and fear, something beautiful had emerged, a story of redemption, of second chances, of ordinary people discovering their extraordinary capacity for love. The evening air was crisp and sweet as people gathered at the Rivers house, their footsteps crunching on newly laid gravel. String lights twinkled overhead like earthbound stars, casting a warm glow across freshly painted walls. The building stood as a testament to survival, its renovated facade gleaming with promise. Mothers carried sleeping babies, while older children darted between adults, their laughter mixing with the hum of conversation. Inside, volunteers arranged chairs in neat rows and set out platters of home-cooked food on long tables. The scent of fried chicken and sweet potato pie drifted through open windows. Imani stood near the entrance, greeting each person with a warm smile. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, her hair pulled back softly. Caleb stayed close, occasionally hiding behind her skirt, when shyness overtook his usual boldness. As twilight deepened, someone began distributing candles. The flames passed from person to person until the whole gathering glowed with gentle light. A local choir arranged themselves near the front, and soon the first notes of "Amazing Grace" floated through the air. Children's voices joined in, sweet and clear. The hymn swelled as more people added their voices, filling the space with harmony. Imani closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. Memories of the past months, the fire, the floods, the fear, and the faith played through her mind like a movie. When the song ended, she stepped forward to address the crowd. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This building stands because of every one of you. Your hands rebuilt these walls. Your hearts filled these rooms with love." She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "When the storms came, both literal and spiritual, you showed me what community really means. You..." Movement at the back of the room caught her attention. Ethan had slipped in quietly, Landon holding his hand. They both carried unlit candles. Her words faltered as their eyes met across the room. Caleb spotted them immediately. "Landon!" he called out, breaking free from his mother's side. He ran to his friend, throwing his arms around both Landon and Ethan in an enthusiastic embrace. The sight of the three of them together, Ethan in his casual clothes, the boys grinning, made Imani's heart flutter. The crowd parted naturally as Ethan and the boys made their way forward. Someone passed them a flame for their candles. The soft light illuminated their faces as they drew closer. "Sorry we're late," Ethan said softly when they reached her. Someone insisted on picking flowers. Landon proudly held up a slightly crushed bouquet of wildflowers. Imani accepted them with a trembling smile. "They're perfect," she whispered. The choir began another song, this time a gentle gospel tune about new beginnings. The assembled community swayed with the music, candles creating dancing shadows on the walls. Ethan stepped closer, his voice meant only for her. "I've been thinking about what you said that night in the church," he began, "about faith and second chances." Imani nodded, remembering their conversation by candlelight as the flood raged outside. "I don't deserve the way you see me," he continued, his voice rough with emotion, "but I want to spend the rest of my life trying." He reached for her free hand, holding it carefully. "You saw goodness in me when I'd forgotten it existed. You taught me that true strength isn't in what we have, but in what we give." Tears spilled down Imani's cheeks, catching the candlelight. The boys watched with wide eyes, still holding on to each other. "Will you let me stay?" Ethan asked softly. "Not as a billionaire or a CEO, but as family, as someone who wants to build something real, with you, with our boys, with this community." The music swelled around them as Imani nodded, unable to speak. Ethan pulled her close, careful of their candles, and wrapped her in a gentle embrace. Caleb and Landon pressed in close, making it a group hug. The crowd, who had fallen silent during their exchange, burst into applause and cheers. Some people wiped away tears while others smiled broadly. The choir launched into a joyful celebration song, and soon the whole room was clapping and singing. Under the twinkling lights, surrounded by the warmth of community and the sound of praise, Imani felt the last of her doubts wash away. The storm that had threatened to destroy everything had instead cleared the path for something beautiful to grow. In its wake, they had all been made new. The late summer morning painted Charleston in shades of gold and rose. Gentle sunlight streamed through the restored windows of the Whitmore mansion, now transformed into a beacon of hope for the community. Where once stood imposing gates and manicured lawns designed to keep people out, welcoming gardens and cheerful playground equipment invited families in. Inside the sprawling kitchen, Imani moved with practiced grace, directing volunteers as they prepared breakfast for the dozen families currently calling the mansion their temporary home. The scent of fresh coffee and warm biscuits filled the air, mingling with the sound of children's laughter echoing through the halls. Ethan stood at the industrial stove, his sleeves rolled up as he flipped pancakes with surprising skill. He'd traded his designer suits for simple button-downs and khakis these days, and the change suited him. The lines of tension that once marked his face had softened, replaced by laugh lines around his eyes. "More blueberries in this batch," Imani suggested, reaching around him to sprinkle them onto the cooking batter. Her wedding ring caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. "Yes, Mom," Ethan replied with a grin, stealing a quick kiss as she passed. Their marriage 2 weeks ago had been simple and beautiful, held in the mansion's garden with the community they'd grown to love surrounding them. Through the kitchen windows, they could see Caleb and Landon racing across the dewy grass, their shouts of joy carrying through the morning air. The boys had become inseparable, more like brothers than friends. Their bond had grown stronger through each challenge their families faced, and now they were officially family. "Those two are going to be hungry when they finally come in," Imani observed, watching them play an elaborate game of their own invention involving sticks as swords and the garden shrubs as castle walls. "When aren't they hungry?" Ethan chuckled, stacking another plate with golden pancakes. "I swear they're both growing an inch every week." The morning routine had become sacred to them all. Each day began with serving breakfast to the families staying at the shelter, sharing stories and plans over coffee and eggs. What had started as emergency housing during the flood had evolved into a transitional program, helping families get back on their feet while building community bonds. The old formal dining room, once reserved for corporate dinners and charity galas, now hosted long tables where children did homework after school and mothers shared job leads over cups of tea. The library had become a career center, and the ballroom transformed into a daycare space filled with toys and reading corners. As the morning progressed, families began, filtering into the kitchen, greeting each other with warm familiarity. Imani knew each of their stories, the single mother studying for her nursing degree, the family saving for a down payment on their first home, the grandmother raising her grandchildren while their mother served overseas. "Miss Imani," called one of the younger children, tugging at her skirt. "Can I help serve today?" "Of course you can, sweetie," Imani answered, helping the little girl up onto a step stool so she could reach the counter. "Remember what we say when we serve? God bless you and good morning," the child recited proudly, carefully passing out napkins to each person who approached. Outside, the morning had grown warmer, and Ethan stepped onto the front steps to call the boys in for breakfast. He watched them race toward him, their faces flushed with exercise and joy. Caleb reached him first, slightly out of breath. "Daddy," Landon called out, "can we go to the park after breakfast?" Before Ethan could answer, Caleb looked up at him shyly, his small hand reaching for Ethan's larger one. The boy's voice was soft but clear as he whispered, "Mommy says you're my daddy now." The simple statement caught Ethan off guard, filling his eyes with unexpected tears. He knelt down to Caleb's level, his heart overflowing with love for this child who had accepted him so completely. Without hesitation, he pulled Caleb into a tight hug, feeling the boy's arms wrap around his neck in response. Imani appeared in the doorway, drawn by the moment unfolding on the steps. She moved to join them, her hand coming to rest on Ethan's shoulder as she smiled down at her son, their son now, wrapped in his father's embrace. From somewhere in the city, church bells began to ring, their clear tones carrying across the morning air. The sound seemed to embrace the scene, the restored mansion standing proud against the blue sky, the gardens buzzing with new life, and the family on the steps, bound together by love stronger than any storm. Inside, the breakfast crowd had grown, voices and laughter spilling out through the open windows. The mansion that had once been a symbol of isolated wealth now pulsed with life and purpose. Each room held stories of healing, of fresh starts, of broken things made whole again. Ethan stood, keeping one arm around Caleb while reaching for Imani with the other. Landon pressed close to his other side, completing their circle. Together they stood in the morning light, a family forged through fire and flood, strengthened by faith and bound together by love that had proven stronger than any force of nature. Charleston spread out before them, peaceful under the calm skies. The city had weathered its storms and emerged stronger, just as they had. In the distance, the waters of the harbor sparkled, and closer to home, flowers bloomed in the garden beds where floodwaters had once raged. The morning breeze carried the scent of jasmine and fresh possibility, a reminder that even the darkest nights could give way to the most beautiful dawns. As they turned to head inside for breakfast, their steps fell naturally in sync, 4 hearts beating as one, moving forward together into the promise of a new day. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.